Part 2, Irregular Verbs.
At this point in your study of Spanish, when we say the word verb, you probably think of two kinds. Regular.
Yeah, regular! All right, regular's the fun. Yeah!
And irregular.
Boo! Irregular verbs are too hard to remember. Boo-hoo!
But it doesn't always have to be that way. While there are a lot of important irregular verbs that you'll need to know, learning them can be made a lot easier by grouping them into different categories and learning conjugation patterns.
We've created 3 basic categories of irregular verbs: yo verbs, stem change or boot verbs, and bizarro verbs. We'll teach you how to conjugate them in the present tense. The first category of irregular verbs is the easiest. We call them the yo verbs.
Section A, yo verbs.
Yo! Yo! Yo!
We call them yo verbs because in the present tense, they're irregular only in the yo form. Plus, it's fun to say yo.
You may already be acquainted with one of these verbs, hacer. Hacer means to make or to do, and since it's a yo verb, it's irregular only in the yo form. Yo hago, tú haces, usted, él, ella hace. Nosotros hacemos, vosotros hacéis, ustedes, ellos, ellas hacen. See how hacer is only irregular in the yo form? Yo hago. Where the heck did that come from? But check out how the rest of hacer's conjugation is regular. Hacer. It's a yo verb.
Notice that the thing that makes hago so irregular is that G stuck in the middle of it. Not only does that random G pop up a lot in the yo verbs, but you'll also see it a lot in the yo forms of other kinds of irregular verbs. So keep an eye out for it. You'll see it a lot.
We're going to throw 2 more yo verbs at you. Valer, which means to cost or to be worth, and salir, to leave. Just like hacer, they're irregular, but only in their yo form.
Here's the conjugation for valer. Yo valgo, tú vales, usted, él, ella vale, nosotros valemos, vosotros valéis, ustedes, ellos, ellas valen. So valer has a normal ER verb conjugation, except for that crazy yo form. Salir works the same way. Yo salgo, tú sales, usted, él, ella sale, nosotros salimos, vosotros salís, ustedes, ellos, ellas salen. Look at that irregular yo form. Hago, valgo, salgo. Those crazy G's.
Okay, let's adjust our Translator 2000 and see if we can find a program that'll demonstrate these crazy yo verbs.
Do you always make your purchases here?
Yes, I make my purchases here all the time. Ooh, fresh mangoes! Fresh mangoes, cha-cha-cha. Fresh mangoes, cha-cha-cha. Fresh mangoes, cha-cha-cha. Fresh mangoes, cha-cha-cha. How much are these mangoes worth?
I don't know how much they are worth, but I'm worth $3.
¿Siempre haces tus compras aquí?
Sí, siempre hago mis compras aquí. Oh, mangos frescos. Mangos frescos, cha-cha-cha. Mangos frescos, cha-cha-cha. Mangos frescos, cha-cha-cha. Mangos frescos, cha-cha-cha. ¿Cuánto valen estos mangos?
No sé cuánto valen, pero yo valgo $3.
As we move on to other kinds of irregulars, always keep an eye on that yo form. 9 times out of 10, when you're dealing with an irregular verb, the yo form is one of the ones that's crazy. So keep that in mind as we look at other conjugation patterns.
Now, what do we mean by conjugation pattern? When we looked at the conjugation for yo verbs like hacer, we noted that it followed a normal conjugation except for the yo form, which had a random G stuck in it. Later, when we looked at the conjugation for valer, we saw the same thing happen, and again with the verb salir. So we can say hacer, valer, and salir share a conjugation pattern. random G's stuck in their yo forms, and learning to recognize those patterns will really help you with these tricky irregulars.
Section B, stem change verbs.
On to the next category of irregulars, the stem change verbs. This is where the idea of conjugation patterns is really going to kick in. Let's preview a stem change verb, then we can figure out its conjugation pattern.
Meet the stem change verb querer, which means to want, and here's its conjugation.
Yo quiero, tú quieres, usted, él, ella quiere, nosotros queremos, vosotros queréis, ustedes, ellos, ellas quieren.
Check out how the E in querer stem changed into an IE in every form except for nosotros and vosotros. There it stayed an E. This is a standard conjugation pattern for stem change verbs. A vowel in the stem of the verb changes in some way in all forms except for nosotros and vosotros. The nosotros and vosotros forms of verbs are practically never affected in irregular verbs. It's like they've been fortified to prevent bizarre conjugation.
There's a special way to denote these stem change verbs. When you're looking up a stem change verb like querer in a Spanish dictionary, it'll usually have this after it, an E with an arrow pointing to an IE. That means the stem changes in all the forms except nosotros and vosotros.
Once you understand how these stem change verbs work, you can begin to group them into little families according to what kind of changes you need to make. We're going to look at 4 of these little stem change families. First up, the E to IE verbs. More tea, Mr. Boodles? How about you, Smunky?
You've already seen one E to IE verb, querer. Using querer's conjugation pattern as a model, we can figure out how most other E to IE verbs work.
Let's look at the conjugation for the verb pensar, to think. Right away, you can tell from that little E to IE symbol that we're dealing with a stem change verb, and that the E in the stem is going to change to an IE in these forms. So here goes.
Yo pienso, tú piensas, usted, él, ella piensa, nosotros pensamos, vosotros pensáis, ustedes, ellos, ellas piensan.
Yep, just like we thought.
Still having trouble remembering which forms change their stem and which forms don't? Here's a little trick for you. When dealing with a stem change verb, if you draw a line around all the irregular forms like this, you get something that looks like a boot. So when you think stem change verb, think boot verb. Next up, we have 2 more E to IE verbs with a twist. Tener, to have, and venir, to come. And remember when we told you to keep an eye out for those random G's popping up in the yo forms? Well, guess what? Tener and venir are just like the other E to IE verbs, except in their yo forms. Take a look at the conjugation for tener. And let's lose those subject pronouns like yo and ustedes. You should be pretty familiar with those by now.
Tener. Tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tenéis, tienen.
See that? We know tener's a stem change verb, and all's well in Tenerville, except whammo, that yo form, which doesn't go to IE and has that random G we talked about earlier. But other than that, it's a normal stem change verb. And look, we can still draw our boot.
Venir works the same exact way as tener. Its yo form has that random G in it, but other than that, it follows the normal conjugation pattern for the E to IE family of stem change verbs.
Okay, on to our next family of irregular stem changers, the E to I's.
The E to I verbs are stem change and boot verbs just like the E to IEs, except, you guessed it, the E's in the stem just change to I's. Let's look at an example.
Let's conjugate servir, an E to I verb that means to serve.
Servir. Sirvo, sirves, sirve, servimos, servís, sirven.
Notice how the E's change into I's in all the forms except nosotros and vosotros, which you remember are immunized against stem changes. Hey, we can even draw our boot.
Pedir, which means to ask for, follows the same conjugation pattern as servir.
Pido, pides, pide, Pedimos, pedís, piden.
Again, the E gets changed to an I in every form except nosotros and vosotros. But the E to I family of verbs isn't without its yo form deviance. Check out the verb decir, to say or tell.
Decir. Digo, dices, dice, decimos, decís, dicen.
In all those forms that fall inside the boot, the E changes to an I. But check out that yo form. It's not what you'd expect from a stem change verb, but hey, we love it anyway. Now let's look at decir in action.
Today's the big day. Like every other day, the townspeople say which tracks are the chupacabras. One boy says, be careful, so I say, worry not, I'm the chupacabra hunter. I follow the tracks no one follows. They don't follow the tracks. That guy doesn't follow the tracks. Only the chupacabra hunter.
Hoy va a ser un gran día. Como cada día, las personas del pueblo dicen cuáles huellas son de la chupacabra. Un chico me dice que tengo cuidado, pero yo digo, no te preocupes, soy el cazador de la chupacabra. Yo sigo las huellas que nadie sigue. Ellos no siguen las huellas. Ese hombre no sigue las huellas. Solamente el cazador de la chupacabra.
2 families down, 2 to go.
Now we're really moving. The next set of irregular verbs are the O to UEs and the U to UVs.
Psst. Psst. The drill. Use the drill.
You know the drill. The stem changes, blah, 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 except for the nosotros and vosotros forms. Blah, blah. Here are a couple of examples.
Dormir. To sleep. Duermo, duermes, duerme, dormimos, dormís, duermen.
So in verbs like dormir, the O goes to UE.
Now let's look at jugar, the verb that means to play. Its U goes to UE, just like the O did in dormir. Here's the conjugation for jugar.
Juego, juegas, juega, jugamos, jugáis, juegan.
You gotta love those U to UE verbs.
Come on, what?
There's no doubt, this team plays really well.
Yeah, when these athletes play, they play as a team. They don't sleep on the job.
Except that guy. Number 21 is sleeping by the goal.
Incredible! Yes!
No hay duda, este equipo juega muy bien.
Sí, cuando estos atletas juegan, juegan como un equipo. Nadie se duerme en el trabajo.
Excepto ese hombre. El número 21 está dormido al lado de la portería.
Increíble! Sí! The verbs recordar, which means to remember, and devolver, which means to give back or return, are also normal O to UE kinds of verbs. In all forms except nosotros and vosotros, the O's go to UE.
Get ready. We're going to do something that's kind of crazy, a little kooky, possibly dangerous. We're going to show you a dialogue that uses 2 verbs you may never ever have seen. We're going to use the verbs poder and volver in everyday conversation without conjugating them for you first. All we're going to tell you is that poder means to be able to, volver means to return, and that they're both O to UE stem change verbs. Good luck!
Hola, Carmen.
Hola, Diego. ¿Cuándo vuelves a casa?
Estoy en la oficina, pero vuelvo a casa ahora.
¿Puedes hacer las compras para la cena de esta noche?
Sí, puedo. ¿Qué necesitamos?
Leche y queso. Y apúrate, Susana y Marco vuelven de la universidad esta noche, así que esta cena es especial.
Let's listen again, this time without the subtitles. See if you can pick out the different forms of poder and volver.
Hola, Carmen.
Hola, Diego. ¿Cuándo vuelves a casa?
Estoy en la oficina, pero vuelvo a casa ahora.
¿Puedes hacer las compras para la cena de esta noche?
Sí, puedo. ¿Qué necesitamos?
Leche y queso. Y apúrate, Susana y Marco vuelven de la universidad esta noche, así que esta cena es especial.
Were you able to get much of that? Let's look at it again, this time doing a play-by-play as we go.
Hola, Carmen.
Hola, Diego.
Hello, Carmen. Hello, Diego. Blah, blah, blah. So far, so good.
¿Cuándo vuelves a casa?
Aha! Cuando vuelves. Vuelves must be the to form of volver. See how the O went to a UE? Carmen's asking Diego when he's returning home.
Estoy en la oficina, pero vuelvo a casa ahora.
Okay. Diego just said, I'm at the office, but I'm returning home now. And he used the yo form of volver. Yo vuelvo.
¿Puedes hacer las compras para la cena de esta noche?
Yes, in daddy duty. Did you see that? Puedes. That's the to form of poder. Oh, you can guess what's coming up. The yo form.
Sí, puedo.
Told you so.
¿Qué necesitamos?
Leche y queso. Y apúrate, Susana y Marco vuelven de la universidad esta noche, así que esta cena es especial.
She needs milk and cheese. And it looks like tonight's a special dinner since Susanna and Marco are coming home from college. They must be their kids or something. Did you get all that? If so, the dinner's not the only thing that's especial. So are you!
Hopefully by now, you're starting to get the hang of this whole stem change thing. Here are the whole conjugations of volver and poder, just in case you missed them.
Volver. Vuelvo. Vuelves. Vuelve. Volvemos. Volvéis. Vuelven. Poder. Puedo. Puedes. Puede. Podemos. Podéis. Pueden. Just make the vowel change in the stem in all the forms except nosotros and vosotros. And though we didn't have any problems here, remember to watch out for crazy yo forms.
The next group of stem change verbs we're going to look at isn't any different, except for the place where the stem change occurs.
Look at the verb preferir, to prefer. Preferir is an E to IE verb, just like the ones we talked about earlier. But the question is, which E changes, this one or that one? Generally speaking, when you're dealing with a multi-syllable stem like prefer, the stem change happens in the second syllable. So it's this E that's going to go to IE. And that would give us
Prefiero, prefieres, prefiere, preferimos, preferís, prefieren.
So, it works just like any other stem change verb. You just have to make sure you're changing the right part of the stem. And as always, the nosotros and vosotros forms don't change a lick.
The verbs comenzar and empezar have the same issues. They both mean to begin, and they're both stem change verbs, but because they each have more than one syllable, you have to know which vowel changes, which you can usually figure to be the second one. So let's look at their conjugations. Comenzar. Comienzo, comienzas, comienza. Comenzamos, comenzáis, comienzan. Empezar. Empiezo, empiezas, empieza. Empezamos, empezáis, empiezan. Did you catch that? Since the stems comenz and empez have more than one syllable, the stem change happens in the second syllable.
So just remember, if you know you have a stem change verb, but it has more syllables than you know what to do with, remember that the vowel in the second syllable is usually the one that's going to change.
Submitted for your perusal, the last category of irregular verbs we're going to look at. These are some of the most bizarre irregulars out there. And unlike the stem change verbs, you can't predict how they're conjugated. They're weird. They're unnatural. They're bizarro.
Section C. Bizarro verbs.
You're probably already familiar with one of these bizarro verbs, our old friend, ser. It conjugates soy, eres, es, somos, sois, son. There's no rhyme or reason to its different forms, but like most bizarro verbs, it's one of the verbs you'll use the most. Now, we're going to show you one more verb that's almost as useful, twice as bizarre, and always the life of the party. The verb for to go, ir.
Yes, ir is one of the crazier verbs out there. Maybe it has complex conjugation because it doesn't really have a stem. It's all ending. Nobody knows. Here's the conjugation for the verb.
Ir. Voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, van.
I know what you're thinking. That V comes out of nowhere. And notice there's no accent on the vosotros form. Yes, indeed, ir is a tricky verb. But learn it well, my friends. You'll be using it a lot.
¿A dónde va para las vacaciones?
Where do you go on vacation?
Voy a la playa para pasar mis vacaciones.
Ellos van a la biblioteca para pasar sus vacaciones. Muchas gracias, Goya.
Vamos al planeta Tierra para pasar nuestras vacaciones.
Ser and ir. They're crazy. They're weird. They're downright bizarro. Now what say we review them and all of their oddball, irregular friends?
Irregular verbs can usually be put into one of three categories: yo verbs, stem change verbs, and bizarro verbs. Yo verbs like hacer, valer, and salir have normal conjugations, except for their yo forms, which have a G stuck in there. In yo verbs, as well as other types of irregulars, it's a good idea to keep your eyes open since that random G pops in there all the time.
Stem change verbs are verbs in which the stem undergoes some sort of change during conjugation. By grouping verbs together according to their conjugation pattern, it's easier to remember how the verbs change. The most common families of stem change verbs are E to IE verbs, like querer, E to I verbs, like pedir, O to UE verbs, like dormir, and U to UE verbs, like jugar.
Keep in mind that for stem change verbs, the stem changes in every form except nosotros and vosotros. They're immune to all stem changes. Also, in cases where the stem of the verb has more than one syllable, like preferir and comenzar, the change usually happens in the second syllable.
The last category of irregular verbs are the bizarro verbs, like ser and ir. Their conjugations are totally unpredictable, so you just have to memorize them. The upshot is that once you do, you're set for life. Bizarro verbs are used a lot.